What's up guys, Michael here. In this video, we're going to talk about why the economy will never recover to what it is pre-pandemic before 2020. So around 2019. So first we're going to look at a few factors and the reason why behind it. So if you think about it, so the beginning of YouTube back in 2008, around that era, prices back then, a lot of people thought it was like, wow, the economy is crashing. Housing economy decided to implode within itself. And prices such as gasoline, foods, and necessities were back then considered really low compared to what is now. And if you look at the trend, the Federal Reserve is trying to keep around a 2% inflation rate. And the reason why, because when you have inflation around 2%, it encourages growth. Meaning it encourages people to borrow money, but not go to the point to the extreme, which in that case, if you look at 2008, they took it to an extreme and for the housing bubble that exploded. And of course, there's other previous instances. So now, if everyone thought about, man, what happens to invest back in 2000 or like 2005, maybe before the housing crisis, and here's your opportunity once again. And why did I explain that it will not go backwards is because there are a couple factors. For example, one factor is you guys should click the subscribe button down below and a like button. But on serious cases, you look at the theory behind supply and demand, as I mentioned many times in this channel. You look at the supply and you look at demand. Demand keeps going up. Supply stays stagnant. And do people try to push for supply, meaning that includes politicians, that includes business people, including investors who put money into businesses to increase the supply. So first, we got to look at a few things. The first thing is you look at investors. Investors put money into businesses for them to generate revenue. When they generate revenue, they give the revenue back into investors. And investors, including myself, I hate to admit this applies to everyone else, would not like to invest in things that do not make money, as it is what it is. And if that's the case, then you won't have enough people wanting to go within that specific field of subject. For example, food. If you complain food prices are so high, why don't we artificially limit it? For example, raising interest rates, what the Federal Reserve is currently doing. Or at the same time, the best idea is, why doesn't America provide more incentives for farmers to grow more food? Or invent new technologies for farmers to start developing products and ideas to sell food in the mass so they can basically take advantage of making more profit and in theory drive down prices. Supply and demand, more supply than demand, because demand itself is not going down. And you look at 2020 to 2021, look at what happened. The housing crisis itself decided to shoot up. It was already happening before, keep in mind. People are still buying houses, but not to extreme. And for some reason, during 2020 to 2021 and to break into 2022, people just went on craze to buying houses. It's like, oh my God, there's a pandemic. We need a home. And everyone started rushing in. Then all of a sudden, you have the seller side. The seller side is still around the same. And the same time is you gave them a lot of leverage to sell prices even higher. If they sell housing prices even higher, then everyone else can do the same because they look at the market value. Now, how does it apply to everything else? Then we look at the second problem is you look at the federal government and how they are taking care of this issue. And the issue is they're not. For example, the investors, of course, they're there to make money, so there's nothing much you can do. If investors were people who are not seeking profit, then that's a different story. Everyone's seeking profit when they invest to fight against inflation. That's how the economy works in America. Now, you look at politicians. Can they solve the problem? They definitely can. They have rules and incentives and opportunities they can create for people to lower down inflation. The only thing they did was literally, you can put it this way, the bare minimum. It's like, oh, we don't know what to do. Housing prices are going up, gasoline prices are going up, what should we do? And instead of increasing the supply, why do we just artificially limit it by raising interest rates? And it kind of worked. It worked back then. They call it Reaganomics because Ronald Reagan was the one that really pioneered the whole entire theory and pushed it forward. And of course, there's a lot of other people put that idea in, but he's the one that's basically known for. So the issue there is, as I mentioned many times, is only works so far. People are going to eventually accept the fact that interest rates are high, and they're still going to buy products because demand itself is always growing. It'll change from time to time. For example, housing, it's always going to be a demand for there. Now, whether how high it is, that'll really depend on the season and depend what type of generation it is. For example, the millennial generation, maybe it's around time the generation around this year for them to buy a bunch of homes. So you'll see an influx of millennials trying to look for a home, but they can't find it affordable because it's way too dang expensive. For example, California, really expensive housing. You look at Texas. It used to be cheap housing, but now it's going up. And Texas laws and regulations states that how you get charged for property tax every single year, it gets reassessed. Meaning they get reassessed not when you bought the home for that value. They're reassessed for the value that's currently within the market value. So your property tax is going to cost you an arm and a leg. So you get a double whammy there. Then what else they can do? So if I mention this way, what happens if politicians decide to say, hey, let's provide farmers the water that they need by inventing resources like, for example, getting fresh water by doing through desalination instead of basically shutting down every single power plant. Start inventing new ways to generate more cheap electricity. For example, nuclear power will be actually a really great way to make green energy. Just build it away from populations. But the problem is the incentive to build one and investment. For example, investors really want fast returns, which makes sense. And if you start putting money, for example, in nuclear power, you have a lot of issues like nuclear waste and how people will take care of it, because obviously even nuclear power can be very safe, but it won't be safe if someone mismanages it. And in this case, America has a horrible track record, apparently, on top of managing and keeping things done. And of course, a lot of people don't have trust in the U.S. government. And that includes me too. Unfortunately, it is what it is. But what you can have trust in is clicking the subscribe button down below, which brings down the third thing. So you have the first one, which is investors. You have number 2, the politicians. And you have number 3. Let's put it this way. Let's face it, it's the viewers and the people buying the products. So if you are going to buy the products and you want this change, then you have to make that habit to change too, to let them know. For example, will be voting with your wallet. Another second thing is when you go to your politicians, you petition them to do a certain project. You have to give them a push. And at the same time, for example, you want to solve homeless problem. The homeless problem requires a lot of different techniques and tactics. But the problem is so many people are so bent on just not making that change. They want to solve homeless problem as long as it does not affect them. The problem is it affects everybody within that community. That's why you want to solve that homeless problem. So, for example, not building enough affordable housing and not taking care of what they need. You can build the housing, but doesn't mean they will stay in there. And number 2, you got within that population, you got people that said, oh, we allow them to live everywhere. So that becomes another problem. Now, how does it break down to the economy? So if you're going to bring down supply, then you need people to trust in the economy, trust in the system. If you have a lot of taxpayers and people are not trusting the economy and not trusting the politicians and what they do because they're basically bent on being incompetent in every way, shape, or form. Doesn't matter if you're in the left or in the right, you're just incompetent because they're just there to get the votes from you guys. And unfortunately, it is the way it is. But you could make a change by, for example, if you want to bring down food prices, start offering incentives to build a farm. If the government want to help you, then hopefully yourself, if you're not an investor, maybe it's time for you to get into that platform. Maybe it's time for you to start that business. Go into that space. So you have multiple categories. You got food, you got electricity, you got basically housing, construction, plumbing, whatever that needs help. For example, let's say that food prices are going really high. Okay, fine. What type of food prices? Are you talking about meat? Are you talking about vegetables? Are you talking about wheat, bread, corn? The list goes on. What type of product? Then you have to break it down from there. Then you find that specific product and you build a business around that. Then this is all about supply and demand. You got to increase the supply and when that supply goes higher than demand, that is when prices go down. And the only way to make a change, if the investors are not going to do it, the politicians are not going to do it, then it's up to us as the people. Now, another perfect example is you look at housing. You look at construction firms. So housing, okay? So what you need from housing? You need a lot of material. Material such as what? Then it breaks down from there. Wood, what type of lumber? Do you need one type of insulation? For example, fiberglass, foam, caulking. There's a lot of things that go into it. You need labor. Now, what type of sector within construction that needs the price to be lowered? Now, maybe you can build a business around that lowers that price. You become a competitor within that market. And when you become a competitor, you will lower prices down. And keep in mind, you don't want a monopoly in some of these. Like there are times you want a monopoly in a business and there are times you don't want a monopoly. In this case, you don't want a monopoly because you want to drive down prices. So if you do have a monopoly, this could work too, because I could be wrong and monopoly might actually be better, but that really depends on the situation. But what breaks down the overall price of things and why they will not go past what happened in 2019 or never go down to like why gasoline price will never be like less than $1, because in that point, in that sector, it's technically, you can blame it as the government's fault and the people, including us, is our fault too, because we decided to drive up the prices and put a lot of rules and regulations on things. But of course, there are going to be new inventions and new incentives, and also inflation is going to continue running its course. So right now they're going to drop it down to 2%. But even you drop down inflation down to 2%, products and prices will never be the same as back at the year of 2000, the year 1980, maybe an earlier before, where like gasoline less than $1, buying necessity and vegetables are less, and raising the minimum wage, that can only do so far. What, you want to end up like Zimbabwe, where they have the $1 trillion bill? Can always go through that way too. Hey, it's just a suggestion if you want to ruin your own economy. But it seems like at this point, the US government is just bent on just not making changes. And what changes you could do, click on the subscribe button down below, and I'll see you guys next time.